Welcome to the very first episode of the year 2023. I hope you've had a really amazing holiday Christmas celebration. I hope you've spent quality time with your family. It's Christmas is a big deal for us, and we try to make it as much as we can to gather around, be with family or extended family. We'll make the most out of it. Welcome to this week's episode of the Practical SQL Server HA show, where I talk about uh, dealing with, managing, or even designing uh, SQL Server high availability solutions from a practical point of view. Because, I mean, what good is what you're going to learn if you cannot take action, you cannot put it into action, rather, and make the most out of it. Today's or this week's topic is perfect for starting the year right and getting into the groove of things, because you know how it is when you've been on an extended vacation, maybe something that would take about a week or even more. It's kind of like tempting to just slack off, and it's just natural. Coming out of that long vacation where you feel like, I don't want to go back to work yet, but this is where you start creating momentum. And what I want to talk about today is how you can make the most out of your HADR solutions in the new year. If you've just gotten out of uh, change freeze period, right, where you're not supposed to touch anything, you're not supposed to make any changes to the system, no code updates, no uh, configuration changes, nothing. This is the perfect time for you to start looking at your high availability solutions, because there will be a wave of projects coming in. Because now everything's like, okay, I can do anything that I want with of course, proper change management process is still necessary. But this is the right time, the perfect time for you to start looking at how you can make the most out of your HADR solutions. I want to share with you three things that you can do starting now, because you got a long year ahead of you where you can plan out and start working on how you can improve your HADR solutions. There's a couple of ways that you can have a look at this. Have your pen and paper ready. Let's get started with this real quick, because again, why not? It's the new year. Let's get on with this. We want to make things happen. I'm not a big fan of New Year's resolutions. I'm more of a goal-oriented type of person, where I would write down goals, and I don't write year-long goals where you kind of wait until the end of the year to get. I kind of structure it in like 6 months or sometimes quarter-long goals. Set goals for a quarter. Make sure that I do achieve those goals, and then another quarter turns in, and then start working on new goals. And this is also why I kind of incorporated that practice with how I would manage high availability solutions. Because for one, even in the stage of in the design phase, it would take a little bit longer for you to plan out, to scope out. If that is a new project, plan it out, scope it out, uh, procure whatever it is that you need to buy, the licenses, hardware, and all of these things. And that's why I kind of start off early in the year, so that I know I can accomplish more throughout the year, right? Get your pen and paper ready. These are three things that you can do to make the most out of your HADR solutions. First one, this is something that a lot of database administrators or even sysadmins who are taking care of SQL Server databases fail to do. And it should be done on a regular basis. And I kind of look at this as uh, performing maintenance on your car. If you're taking your car every day to and from work, you use it to commute to and from work, you owe it to yourself to perform regular maintenance. Take it to the mechanic on a regular basis to make sure that it still is capable of doing what it's supposed to do, and that is take you to and from work, right? First thing that you can do to make the most out of your HADR solutions is evaluate if they still meet your RPO, RTO, and SLA. Evaluate whether what you've implemented 5 months ago or 5 years ago still meet your RPO, RTO, and SLA. Simple example, backups. I know, we still talk backups in the days and age of AI and machine learning and automation and cloud. We still talk about backups. I'll just use that as an example. In the beginning, maybe you've planned out that doing daily backups, daily full backups would be great because you have a recovery point objective of 15 minutes. You configure log backups to run every 15 minutes. And so you're covered, right? As the business grows, you accumulate more data. You're doing the exact same backups, right? But how long was the backup, or how long did the backup take on the first day, immediately after rolling out your solution to production? What or how long did it take for the backup to complete on day one versus year five? We rely so much on the fact that, hey, my backups are running fine, the jobs are working fine, it says it's successful. We kind of assume, right? We kind of assume that it still works and it still meets our or your recovery point objectives, recovery time objectives, and service level agreements. Again, simple example, full daily backups, 15-minute intervals for log backups. You decide you want to restore the backups. I can restore the full database backup and all the transaction log backups for the last 24 hours, and I still meet my recovery point and my recovery time objective. I'm good. Well, that was 6 months after you've implemented it, you've tested it, and it works. What about now? Maybe back then you started out with a database that's roughly around 200, 300 gigabytes. Now the database is around 1.2 to 2.3 terabytes in size. The database backups are also growing as a side effect of that. Well, have you tested your recovery or your backups? Have you tested restoring your backups? And when you did it still meet your recovery point, recovery time, and service level agreements? Okay, this is the thing. And it's, again, like I said, it's easy to do like a set and forget. Well, we did it once, we tried it. Another example that keeps coming up during conversations with customers, right? They start out with availability groups, they test it, they put 25 databases in there, fail over time, woohoo, seconds, right? 3 years later, they now have 127 databases in one AG. Again, there's no hard and fast rule, although the Microsoft documentation recommends, topping it up at 100. The way I look at it is, well, you got to test. That depends on the number of CPU cores, how much RAM you have, your storage capacity. All of that factors in the failover time, right? So 3 years ago, have databases in an AG, only 25, and now we got 127 or 130. How long is that failover going to take? Oh, not to mention, if you're taking those backups, how long can you restore the backups and still meet your recovery objectives and service level agreements? Controversial opinion. Well, not opinion, but it's something that I tell my customers. I don't really believe in backups. Why? I have been burned so many times in the past where somebody said, yeah, here's the backup, use it, not realizing the backups actually don't work because they were corrupted, they were taken by a third-party vendor, and then when I do the restore, doesn't work, right? One case that I had to work on a couple of years ago, I started noticing corruption on the database. I said, nope, no problem. I can do page level restores. They're on Enterprise Edition. No big deal. I can do it. I asked for the latest full backup, corrupted. Okay, maybe we start looking at the day before. not just the latest, but the day before, still corrupted. Now I'm seeing a pattern. So I asked for the backup from a week ago, still corrupted. Ooh. Yep, starting to see a pattern. I asked for the backup from a month ago, still corrupted. Well, I guess at this point, it's safe to assume that every backup that they've taken for the past couple of months is corrupted. And I told them, look, I can fix your database corruption issue, but it may render the database as unsupported. I don't want to touch it. Call Microsoft support and have it fixed, because I don't want to be legally responsible for this, because it's no longer a technical conversation at that point. When it becomes unsupported, it becomes a legal conversation. So test, evaluate if the database backup strategies. Again, not a big fan of that. More on the restore strategy in my case. If your HADR strategies, the solutions that you've implemented, still meet your recovery point, your recovery time objectives, and your SLAs. If not, well, time to make some modifications, right? The last thing you want is to assume that because you've tested a DR strategy from 5 years ago, it's still going to work, right? When I was working as a data center engineer, part of our quarterly exercise is to test our DR strategy. Got our DR documentation in place, and because we're taking care of a large financial customer, we have to do it quarterly. It becomes tiring when you manually do it. That's why we've come up with a process to automate about 80 to 90% of it. But that's one of the reasons why we constantly evaluate, because again, your data keeps growing. As the data keeps growing, you need to make sure that however you implement some form of HA and DR is still going to meet your recovery point, recovery time, and service level agreement. There are a couple of cases also where I've worked with a customer and they've introduced a new product, a third-party backup solution, because they want to standardize across the entire network or the entire environment, and they're using this to take SQL Server backups. They've installed a SQL Server agent for this specific backup. They took the backup, copied it to an enterprise storage solution. The thing about it is, well, the DR strategy was not written for that backup solution back then. So, are we gonna guess if something went wrong? Again, it's one of those things. Like I said, what you did a few months or a few years ago, even though you've tested it, may no longer be enough to meet your recovery objectives, your recovery, and service level agreements today. And this is the perfect time that you can do it, because it's the beginning of the year. Everybody is looking for opportunities to improve whatever system that they're managing, or people are just looking for improvements. You know how it is, new year, they want to set new year's resolutions. So people are open to making changes and making improvements. So that's the first thing. Make sure that you evaluate whether it's backup, whether it's database mirroring. I know people talk about database mirroring being deprecated. Well, it still works and it's still supported. Whether it's log shipping, whether it's availability groups, whether it's third-party enterprise backups, whether it's whatever you use, evaluate it and make sure that it still meets your system's recovery objectives and service level agreements. Okay, I spent a lot of time explaining and talking about that, because again, just because something works doesn't mean that it will eventually meet your requirements. Kind of like a typical example that I use this, and I use examples as analogies for people to really understand this. You're single, all you need is a two-door, two-passenger car, the driver and one passenger, because you're single. You get married, you got kids. Now a two-door sports car is no longer appropriate, so you now have to buy something else. Maybe you need to upgrade to a family minivan or a mini SUV, and then as the kids are growing, you now have to plan for a bigger house. And this is part of the life cycle of any human beings, much so your databases. So you got to keep evaluating whether or not the solutions that you've done today or you use or using today still meet your overall objectives. Like there's a lot of cases where people are using technologies because it's what they used before, and because they did not evaluate were not still relevant or still appropriate, to keep using it, not realizing that it no longer serves their needs, right? That's one. That is one. The second one is plan for modernization, and I'm using fancy words because that's what a lot of people, uh, corporate people, business people, understand modernization. Well, it's uh, it's a buzzword for plan your upgrades, plan for your migration, and or improvements. You have data in place based on your monitoring tools, based on your inventory about operating system, your database version. Even if it's as simple as, hey, this has not been patched for the past 6 months, maybe it's about time for us to install our cumulative updates. Plan for that. Even if it's as simple as, uh, yeah, we need to install the latest cumulative updates because we haven't installed any for the past 6 months, right? If need be, that you need to implement some form of modernization because, well, SQL Server 2020, 2012 is no longer um, um, under mainstream support. Maybe it's about time for you to start planning for an upgrade or migration. Maybe your hardware is no longer supported and you're planning for a hardware refresh. Maybe you can start planning for the cloud. That way you don't have to worry about, buying hardware and transferring licenses. One of the key challenges that people encounter, especially when they were moving from SQL Server 2008 to later versions like 2012 and 2014, is the licensing behind it. And so what worked for them back then, because now back then it was per CPU, now it's per CPU, or per socket, now it's per CPU core, it became even more expensive. So now you can start thinking about, hey, uh, should we do something like put everything on the cloud, or maybe try the cloud? Or with SQL Server 2022, with the option to leverage something like a pay-as-you-go thing, where you can leverage Enterprise Edition features, uh, bump up the number of CPU cores during busy times in the year, and then scale it down and only pay licenses for what you need. Leverage that. There are all of these new benefits for SQL Server customers when you decide to migrate to SQL Server 2022. For me, just leveraging Enterprise Edition features without having to pay for a full-blown Enterprise Edition license and use, uh, they call it pay as you go, but that's one thing that you can take advantage of and modernize your database infrastructure. Not only that, operating system, maybe you need to upgrade because you're still running on Windows Server 2012. Maybe it's time for you to move on to Windows Server 2022. Of course, considering the fact that your application still need to support those versions, so you gotta talk to your application vendors if you're looking at third-party apps, or make sure that your developers, if this is an internal system, make sure that your developers are planning for testing newer versions, and then you can plan for upgrades, right? I didn't spend a lot of time on this because, for one, this is an entire project in and of itself, right? When you look at um, updating your HADR strategy to meet your recovery objectives, it may be a little bit of a tweak. Maybe instead of just having a full database backup and a series of log backups, because the database has grown big, you can now start introducing differential backups alongside with full and transaction log. That's a minor tweak on your backup strategy. And, well, I don't want to say minor tweak on your restore strategy, because you got to test it and document it properly. This one is an entire project in and of itself, right? Migrating from an old version of SQL Server to a new version of SQL Server, migrating from an old version of Windows to a new version of Windows, or migrating both. I don't actually recommend just migrating the OS and or rather OS or SQL Server alone, might as well do it both the operating system and SQL Server, because, well, for one, you're going to do it anyway. So why waste time doing it again when you can do it in one shot? Uh, Consultants love this because they get to bill twice. Not a big fan of that. If I can minimize the effort of doing something like this, because it's a necessary evil. Migrating, upgrading is something that you have to keep doing on a regular basis, depending on what version of the OS, what version of SQL Server, and even with hardware, when you're doing your hardware refresh, that's also part of that. So there's really no escaping the fact, and that's one of the major reasons why people or customers decide to move to the cloud. Well, I don't have to worry about that. Let the cloud vendors take care of hardware refreshes, operating system upgrades, especially if you're dealing with platform as a service, right? Infrastructure as a service, you're taking care of everything except for the hardware, right? But for platform as a service, you don't even know what version of the operating system it's running on, even the version of SQL Server it's running on. You just have to make sure that your applications still work. So plan for that. Plan for modernizing your database platforms. Plan for uh, uh, maybe moving to the cloud so you can minimize the costs associated with modernizing it. The third thing, right? The third thing is to staff enough for proper coverage. So we go back to the first thing that I mentioned, which is to evaluate your existing HA and DR solution. If you've identified that your existing HADR solution is no longer serving your needs. So for instance, um, common scenario, Microsoft Access database has now become a mission critical app. They migrated it to SQL Server, right, from Access to SQL Server, put it on a standalone instance because it has grown too large that even SQL Server Express is not enough, grown too large, has become mission critical, and now a simple backup restore strategy is no longer enough. Back then, one guy can take care of that. So you decide, hey, our existing HADR strategy, or in this case, DR because there was no HA, it's time to implement an HA strategy, but we gotta make sure that we have people in place to take care of this when it goes to production. A common scenario, you don't know how to deal with failover clustering, you don't know how to deal with AGs, you bring in an external consultant or a third-party vendor, a managed services provider, they set it up, they deployed it, and then they hand it over to you once it's already business as usual, it's in operations, but you don't have any clue as to how it works. There was no handover, nothing, right? When that happens, you are jeopardizing your system because, again, it's not enough for you to set and forget, right? Deploy an HA solution. No, it requires care and feeding. It requires, and more than just monitoring it, is having the right people in place who can deal with an issue in case something happens. The worst part of this, the worst situation to be in, is to be the person responsible, but you don't know exactly what to do or how to deal with it, right? So plan and staff enough for proper coverage. The minute that you turn a standalone instance into an HA solution, be it failover clustered instances, availability groups, database mirroring, or whatever kind of that, you need to consider 24/7 coverage. Okay? It's also one of the reasons why I'm not a big fan of leveraging availability groups for DR, but not having an HA strategy, right? Prioritize HA first if you need to, and you're looking at AG. Otherwise, just use log shipping. If you're not concerned about high availability, use backups. Backup, copy, restore. Copy it over to another data center. Put it on tape. Yeah, I did say tape. Or S3, Amazon S3. But the thing is, the minute that you've converted a standalone instance, the minute that you have increased the criticality of a system, okay, you now have to properly staff for a 24/7 support. Okay, If you don't have anybody else other than you, and your boss starts asking you to implement an HA solution, push back until you have a backup. You need to have a backup. It cannot just be you taking care of a 24/7 solution, because you cannot be 24/7 available. You need to sleep, you need to eat, you need to go on vacation. Oh yeah, we just came out of holidays. You need to go on holidays, you need to do something for yourself. And so there's proper coverage in order for you to maintain, uh, manage, troubleshoot issues with the high availability strategy. So make sure that you properly staff for that, provide enough coverage, and not just staff. And I've seen this happen in some of my customers, where there's one DBA, there's one sysadmin taking care of SQL Server. They've turned it around and made it a high availability solution. They hired staff, but the staff they hired does not have any clue at all at how the HA solution works. I mean, you might as well have just done things on your own, right? Make sure that you staff enough for proper coverage. And we're not just talking about time coverage where, when you're asleep, somebody's awake so they can take care of you. Because last thing you want is to get woken up by the other person who's supposed to be responsible for this while you're sleeping in the middle of the night, because they don't know what to do. I mean, what's the point? You might as well have just took the on-call assignment, because he can't do anything. I've seen it happen. Operational people or operational engineers, they get the alert, open a ticket, and then immediately escalate, because they don't know what to do, right? They don't have the expertise, they don't have the skills to deal with that issue. Uh, Even when they do, quick Google search about the error number, the error message, the source, and they still are, you know, they're still blanking out, because they've never touched it before, they've never done it before, don't have any exposure, no experience, and so they create a ticket, escalate. Okay, make sure that you staff enough for proper coverage, and not just enough staff, but enough staff with the right skills and the right expertise to deal with this. In fact, one of the things that I tell my customers: don't ever implement an HA solution, or even a DR solution, especially if you're implementing a third party solution. Don't ever implement something like that if nobody knows how to use it. Right, which goes back to the first thing that we talked about earlier. So when you start evaluating your HADR solutions, you need to make sure that it still meets your overall objective. Is it still meeting your business requirements? Because if it's not going to meet those requirements, then what's the point? Right? We're just making Microsoft, we're giving Microsoft more money by paying more licenses, when it's, whatever we're implementing is not serving the business, it's not solving problems, and it's not meeting the objectives, right? So these are the three things that you can start working on in the new year. And time flies really fast. Next thing you know, it's the end of January and we're turning into February. This is one of those things that you can start working on as a personal project. Take it on. You can actually make it as part of your performance review if you have like quarterly or annual reviews, where you can start working on it and document it. When you start evaluating your existing HADR solutions and you find gaps, you can start coming up with a simple document that you can outline the project that you could undertake and start working towards, so that by the time you have your performance reviews, you can have something that you could show your boss or your manager or whoever is evaluating your performance. It's not a matter of the amount of work that you do, but the value that you bring to the table. In this case, well, we've upgraded and we've modernized our database infrastructure. We're fully supported, right? And we've eliminated some of the things that were a risk to us. We've uh, updated our HADR strategy to meet our needs, and we need to hire more people because the team is growing or the infrastructure is growing. So this is something that you can take on as early as now. You don't have to wait until the end of the first quarter. You can do it immediately, and it's just about spending some time, maybe 30 minutes a day within the next couple of weeks, 30 minutes a day thinking about evaluating your existing HADR solution, looking at whether or not they still meet the business requirements. It still solves the problem that you want to solve with these solutions, plan for modernization, and eventually hire somebody to, who knows, replace you so you can move up. That's also one thing I like about growing people from within and promoting people from within so that I can move. Of course, in my case, I don't have any of that challenge because I run my own business. But the thing is, it helps me promote people from within so that I can move up. You can move up, get promoted. And well, if there's no room to move up, you can move out, look for better opportunities. But because you have the experience of planning for all of these things in the beginning of the year, you have the momentum to move forward throughout the year. Next thing you know, you're accomplishing more this year than you've had in the previous years. All right. That's about it for this week's episode of the Practical SQL Server HADR show. Tune in again next week for another topic. And if you are in, you're kind of second guessing yourself, you're thinking, hey, how do I evaluate whether the HADR solution that we have still meet our recovery point objectives or your recovery objectives and service level agreement? Somebody else set it up, not me. The DBA that was here did it, and he didn't have a document to hand over. He didn't uh, give me some ideas, and you're clueless. Use that link on the screen. This would direct you to my calendar page where you can book a time to speak to me. And we can have that conversation about looking at how your HADR solution is set up and whether or not it still meets your business requirements, looking at what you can possibly modernize, maybe upgrading older versions. We'll have that conversation. And if I can help you address those, I'm more than happy to do that. If not, I will steer you to the direction that would help serve you best. Again, use that link on the screen, schedule a strategy session, and let's have that conversation. I'm more than happy to help in any way I can. All right. Tune in again next week for another topic. It's the beginning of the year. There's a lot of possibilities throughout the year. There's so much to accomplish. There's so much ahead of you. I look forward to having you again next week. Enjoy your weekend. Goodbye.